This is your cell.
Si eres ladrillo, seré concreto. Si eres oreja, seré Van Gogh. Si eres...
فما كاري ابيض، فما ريكتانجل ابيض فيرتيكال.
تو دي تصور دي. كيك.
I win it.
Oder bleibt es Utopie? Jeder Mensch weiß, es ist ein Kreis, nimmer weit, Elend und Leid, der nie getreibt, innerlich schreit sich zerreißt.
Hello. Hello and good evening. Welcome to another evening of Berlin Critics Week debates. This evening we have another evening of a format we established last year. It's a critics debate. Two film critics react to a film. Today we will have here Maggie Lee. She's a film critic of Variety, a chief film critic for the Asian region. And we have Patrick Holzapfel. He's the editor-in-chief for Jugend ohne Film. Moderated will the talk be by Lucía Salas, and she is a film critic as well. And she's a member of the selection committee of Berlin Critics Week. They debate tonight Sion Sono's Red Post on Escher Street and the Dracula sex tape by Olivier Godin. And we are very curious about what they think about these two very special films. So I give over to Lucía, and I wish you a very interesting evening.
Thank you very much. Hello, everyone. Thanks for being here, especially to our panelists for tonight. It is very rare that we are able to discuss a film without the filmmakers being part of the conversation, even if they are part of the conversation because they are watching. But I wanted to first say thank you to the filmmakers for allowing us to do this playful format of two film critics discussing the films. And I wanted to start by asking you about your watching experience, because, you know, if this were a normal Critics Week edition, we would all be together in a theater, so I would have been able to catch a glimpse of you watching the films, and I would have seen your reactions, and you would have seen mine, so we would all have, I don't know, some idea of how we physically reacted to the films. But in this case, I am totally blind to that. So I wanted to ask you about your watching experience. Not only where were you when you watched these films, and if you watched them together, and if you felt the need to stop the films at some point, or if you watched them all straight up. I know with Sion Sono's film, I didn't watch it complete. I had to, I don't know, go to the bathroom at some point and something like that. So I wanted to know first about your physical reactions to the film and your watching experience. Maggie, do you want to go first? Wait, you're muted.
Sorry. I have to say I've been becoming, I've been less excited about seeing Sono's films, in the past couple of years. And my expectations weren't very high when I started watching it. And the first hour was just saying, oh God, here he goes again. But I have to admit that it got better and better. And by the last half hour, I was actually quite touched. and I quite, I mean, it really, had the time to build up your film. You got to know the characters and all the different stories. Actually, not that it came together, and in a way, I'm glad it didn't come together, but the way it ended, the kind of atmosphere of exuberance, I actually quite enjoyed. So, I mean, yeah, I didn't mind it, let's say.
If you ask me about my reaction to both, I mean, I tried to watch them back to back because I understood it as a program. So I made a break in between, which was not very long because the first film is only 5 minutes. I tried to watch it on a bigger screen than my laptop. My physical reaction would have been sometimes a bit of pain. Like it's so much coming at me. It was a bit, I was overwhelmed with some of it and I couldn't progress everything. A sort of tiredness also with Sion Sono after a while. Then sometimes it got a bit better. And then, I don't know, it was a bit, it was a strange experience, to see that film and to see any of his films, I guess. So not every film, but with this, I had like a regular Sion Sono experience in watching. So yeah, that's my experience with the films.
I like the idea of a regular Sion Sono experience. When we were building the programs, before this was the program in which we did the critics debate, we called this session extra, not only because both films are about extras in a way, and their experience in cinema, but because both films are so extra, And you are both, as Maggie was saying, there is this sense of, for Maggie is exuberance, and for Patrick is being overwhelmed or pain. And I think, how could you think about these two things together? The exuberance and the pain that both films have in their being so extra.
I think that it depends a bit on what we are looking for, no? Because I experienced lately that in cinema, I don't really look for films that give me that kind of so many images. And so they are very, it's like in German, we say he shoots from the hip. I don't know if that makes any sense. So they are not, they're not planning a shot or anything. It's like very instinctive. Especially the Sion Sono. That's how it feels. I don't know how he actually works, but it feels very direct, but a lot of images, not a lot of care for a single image, but more for the flow of images. And that makes me very tired nowadays because I get so many images every day anyway. So I like to see something else, but this is, of course, based on a subjective experience. But I think the subjective experience is an experience we all have in a world where we live with images. So I would at least try to make a point out of that without saying that it's true for everybody.
I think it's really interesting that you brought up how it's kind of tiring and that it's not structured. I think that's again, it's like back to the experience of watching his films, is that practically everything he does, he always, and it's a very strange paradox, because whenever you start watching this film, whenever he starts with the film, like the acting's just so over the top, and everyone's like shouting, and it's just like quite unbearable. But strangely enough, like by the end of a lot of his films, he's managed to single out the main protagonist or the main actors. And somehow they do go on this like process where from being really over the top in their acting, that they somehow find a heart within that character. And then by the end, it's like a lot of them, it's almost like a slow metamorphosis. And by the end, it's like they manage to give these really heartfelt performances that they usually are unable to do in the more structured, more commercial Japanese films. And then they sort of liberate themselves. And then the performance is like really fantastic. And it's a bit harder with this film because like most of the cast is not, it's not like they're unprofessional, but they haven't really made it yet in the industry to get really main roles, and it's the first time that some of them managed to get those main roles. And I think the two main female characters by the end of the film, they were really quite impressive too, but not to the extent of some of the other actors that he's cast before. Yeah, but it's that's kind of quite interesting for me. But at the same time, I totally agree with you in the sense that this lack of structure, just and the sort of the way he never thinks about making his film shorter, it is quite tiring. Yeah. And another thing that I kind of found quite interesting was that in the beginning, when they kept repeating the same lines, because they kept repeating the auditions, like on the one hand, it's like kind of draws attention to the whole process of filmmaking, which is that it is very, very repetitive, and that this is how the process is for auditioning. But at the same time, of course, it was quite, in the beginning, it was, for me, it was kind of really tedious just watching them going over and over again, doing the same lines, and their acting was terrible. And I wasn't sure whether they were trying to act like people who couldn't act or whether they were naturally unable to act. But after a while, again, like that repetition started to have slight variations, and then you sort of got into it, strangely enough. So I guess it worked for this particular film in the end.
I sometimes feel, I understand what you said. I sometimes feel that what you described is like in the end, he finds something, he finds what he wanted to say, or he finds like a true core to his characters out of all this exaggeration and craziness, and he finds that. But I find that he does it by doing a very like almost cliche melodramatic thing under the surface that is there from the beginning. Like the conflicts are the most basic conflicts always, like family, father, daughter, these things, like love stories, triangles, and then he puts all in a literal sense, he puts all the color over them, like he really does. And then we are surprised by the effect that actually underneath it is some humanity. And I'm not sure what that means if somebody works like that, like he hides the humanity in order to reveal it for us to see. That's sometimes what strikes me in all of his films, basically. I mean, there were some exceptions, of course. It's also tricky to talk about all his films, because I think there's a huge difference. But I mean, in an idea of Sion Sono, we can have as an auteur, whatever that is.
I agree with that a lot. And there's something I maybe should mention in a way. I don't know if you're aware of these other films that's been quite popular from Japan. It's like one film is called Extra. I don't know if you've seen it. It's actually hilariously funny. It was at Nippon Connection last year. And it's a mockumentary about these extras, basically. And then, of course, they find real extras, and they create this place, which is a kind of a sort of very countryside place, but somehow they have this one film set that people use to shoot period costume films, and all the people who live around there, like, you know, their lifeblood is like being an extra. Then it's just, and then the film is like full of these hilarious like spoofs of like different Japanese genres, and it's very touching at the end too, and it's actually quite similar to some of the characters in Red Escher, because like those people who are like, who make a habit, who's like, you know, retired people in particular, who just, you know, their biggest hobby is being an extra. And I actually know quite a lot of people in Japan whose parents do it after they've retired, and they used to be like, you know, managers of big companies. They really love it. So that film kind of, I'm not saying that Sono is referring to that film or that he's even seen it, but I think it's quite interesting that that film's come out. And then of course there's also like the other two films that's been really hot, even outside of Japan. Like it's the director Ueda Shinichiro. So he made the film The One Cut of the Dead, which is a kind of spoof of a zombie film with a really big twist. And again, it's about the whole, he kind of like in a way sort of foreground, like lays bare the whole process of filmmaking through this like low budget zombie film. And he runs these workshops with non-professional actors to do it. And then the next film he made is called Special Actors. And again, it's like a comedy about this agency that gets like these extras and non-pro or like kind of part-time actors to act in real life situations to help people. Like, you know, like for example, you know, they pretend to be an ex-boyfriend of a girl so that the new boyfriend can punch him up to impress the girl, or they pretend to be audiences of the stand-up comedy and they just laugh like hell, that sort of thing. So again, it's like that sort of recent trend in Japanese cinema to talk about amateur actors and extras, or also the idea of the workshop training ground for actors, like, you know, Hamaguchi, you know, who's got a film in Berlinale now, and he also worked a lot with workshop actors, as well as like Fukada Koji, another recently quite popular Japanese director. He also uses people from his theater group, and he sort of works with them to improvise. So maybe that's like he's in the way he's tapping into, this film taps into this new trend in Japanese cinema, which is less popular in the past, because in the past they had more budget and they cast more, like, you know, paid actors for the roles.
Would you maybe, because I don't know so much about it, so maybe you can tell me a bit, because I don't, because I think in cinema, in general, in cinema, there is they make films about making films. I mean, this has been going on forever, and now I think it's there. So what is the specific about the Japanese way of doing that? Also in my head, having in my head that I think Sion Sono has made a lot of films. He has made a lot of films about the power of the camera or the danger of the camera in relation to humans.
I think what's interesting is not necessarily this whole idea about, you know, film within the film, that conceit, because like you say, it's nothing new. But I think what is quite new in Japan is the fact that they're drawing more and more on improvisation and drawing more on non-professionals, because the industry's become less and less professional due to the lack of budget. And it's like, you know, because in the past, when you're trying to make an independent, because in Japan, they have two types of cinema, apart from the expensive, glossy commercial films, they call it indies. And they call, which is like Jishu Eiga, which means like literally translates as self-governed or self-mastered film, which is actually the lowest on the run, because it's like no budget. And then you have something called independent film. But these so-called independent films are not like the independent films you see from Philippines, or for example, you know, those are actually films where they're produced by smaller companies and have like a bit more private investment, but they still have a budget, and they're used to have a budget, and then they'd come out looking pretty well made, even though the subject would be more free for the director to explore. But that's kind of really bottomed out because of the industry. Like all the money's just gone to like animation and commercial films. So what's left now is more like just the indies or jishueiga, where people just get their friends together and just put together a film. And even though they try really, really hard, the resources are so limited that, you know, the quality of the production has really, really slowly declined as a result. And then now a lot of filmmakers, no matter how talented they are, they have to have a day job. Usually it's working in a convenience store because of the shifts. And they've also had to rely more and more on non-professional actors. And that's why they started developing more and more workshops. And something that I noticed from the Sonoshion is that he did an interview with Japan Cuts in New York, a film festival and society, when he premiered the film in the US, this film in the US. And he did an interview, and in the interview he mentioned something which I thought was really interesting, which is in a way why I kind of like this film more than his other recent films, is that he said he's worked often with people who are in his films who are not like the A-list actors, and there may be just people who professionally always do like supporting roles, and he said, but those people come to the set because they're still paid, whatever their intentions or their passion or lack of it, they're still paid. But when he was working for this film, because it came out of a project where he was asked to run an acting workshop with these people who already have some training, but they're just more like people who are who really want to enter the industry. So in Japan, they call them Haiyu no tamago, which is like eggs of actors, because they're not hatched yet. And these people are very passionate. And he was saying that for these people, when they paid to be in this workshop, to be taught by him. And so he decided to like make this film project for them to give them a chance to act. But still, he's saying that these people are paying to be in this film rather than being paid to be in the film. And he said he really felt he had to put more of his personal effort into working with them, and also to give them more opportunities to shine in the film. And so it sort of grew from a kind of, for me, it really grew from having a lot more heart, and he felt so much more like he could return to the earlier stages of his filmmaking when he was a poet and when he was a genuine independent filmmaker. And in a way, I think, back to when we were talking about his complete lack of structure in making films, it's not just that he wants to be a disruptor. I think it's also because he started out as a poet. And it's almost like, you can never tell a poet to write a long novel. And in a way, his films are sort of like that he doesn't really care to structure them. And also like the last scene, he was saying that it was entirely the street scene when everyone was on the street, and he let it to be completely improvised, except for the policemen, that he actually had to have real have the actors as policemen, even though he said he hoped that real policemen would interfere and then it would make it even more improvised. Yeah.
I wanted to ask you guys about this, because I knew also about this project and about the idea of him making this film because of this workshop. And I wanted to ask you, what do you think the politics behind this is? Because the politics behind his idea of the extra also, right? Because this is a film that in a way is about taking the background and putting it in the foreground, but it's also the background of what is important in a film shooting, and there's a hierarchy of actors, and it's all weaved inside the plot, no? There's a hierarchy between lead actors and extras, and how there's a little revolution about that. So I wanted to know your thoughts on the politics of this operation.
Yeah, that's actually something where these are now the two terms are in the air that I have the most problems with concerning with that film. The one is, now I go first with Lucia's, what you mentioned now, it's the politics of the film that is supposed to be what you said, I think, like there is an idea of, now we highlight the extras, because it's not only the extras of a film set, but also the extras in daily life, like the people that are not the main actors in society. I understand that, but then I have a couple of questions. For example, he has these, why in his own film then he also has extras, for example, the people that are the construction workers, where they have to pass to go to the casting. Then he could have also, I think in an ideal setting, he should have made, he should have told the backstory of all characters. That would be, and not tell the story of the director, because my greatest problem with the film is then, how can he impose such a style on the film that is obviously his style, like in the sequence where the dream sequence where the colors are thrown at the women and so on, that is really like showing I'm Shion Shono, that's my way of making films. That is really against his idea of making a film about the extras, because in the end this is a film about him, for me, about his life, about what he does, not about any, I don't find any person in the film really portrayed. It's only the excitement of seeing movement, of seeing, and that is perfectly fine, but I don't think it's a very political statement, or it's not well done if it is.
I'm not sure if he wants to make a political statement, but I do agree with you that his egotistic self is still in there, but I think it's not something he can stop himself from. In the sense, he also mentioned that, like in that interview with Japan Society, he said, oh, you know, like, obviously I can't, you know, obviously, I mean, on the one hand, of course, he's making a bit of a parody about those like self-centered, you know, artsy filmmakers, you know, who just wants to have his vision like expressed, but and also, but at the same time having all these doubts and writer's blocks and things. But at the same time, you know, he actually openly admits it. He said, oh, well, you know, I've had, you know, a lot of it was my personal experience in that film. You know, I've worked with really horrible, nasty producers who just made my life hell. And those people in the film were, you know, those horrible producers and investors were people that I personally worked with. And he just loves saying that sort of thing. Yeah. So I don't think he was making any particularly huge, deep, profound political statement or philosophical statement about filmmaking. You know, he was just like moving a little bit like one step closer to the cast and giving them more of a chance to act. But like you said, you know, I felt like, you know, if you have a chance, I'd recommend you see something like One Cut of the Dead or Extra, where especially Extra, because that film really had so much more feeling and love and respect for the extras than this film in particular. But one thing that I did find myself, although of course, you know, that whole thing about all these groupies adoring the director, you know, I found that, I know it's a bit of a parody, but I also found that a bit distasteful. But I did feel that compared to a lot of his other films, you know, like, which are just so misogynistic, at least this film, the female characters are less, you know, vile than a lot of his other films. And at least, like, you know, the girlfriend, like Katako, she played a part as a muse, but then again, she had to be a ghost, you know? Yeah. I mean, I don't know what you think about that, like, you know, the way that the female characters were represented in the film. I'd be interested to know.
Yeah, I mean, maybe that relates to it, because I wanted to say that, I mean, I have been working with extras, actually. I worked as a director's assistant for 3-4 years. Not on the level of like big productions, only one time, but I knew what kind of, I also worked for a telenovela, for example, where I directed the extras, which is a very interesting thing to do. And for example, I mean, of course, Japan is a very different place from where I did it in Germany, but I never had the feeling that the people represented in that film are the people I met as extras. The motivations were different. Nobody ever knew the director where I was, even if the director was a bit more famous or whatever. The director was not important. The actors would have been important. Like, we want to be like the actors, something that is not in the film. But to me, it's very logical. I mean, you want to be in front of the camera. There's some actor you know from television, so you want to be like her or him. And also, I mean, the only person in the film that I felt I knew from this is the old man who has the videotapes of where he was, the 1 second he appears in the film. I met those. Like, they would tell you, I have been in this and this and this film or whatever. I've been doing this for 20 years. I come here every year. And as I understand. So that is what I can say about that. I mean, actually, I'd be more interested. I mean, what I can say about the, I'm a bit hesitant to say something about the representation of women, because it's a question for this whole oeuvre, no? I mean, it's a huge question, and I never know how to deal with it. If it's like, if it's really against women or makes them like objects, which I sometimes feel very strongly in his films. Sometimes I feel it could also be a feminist critique. It's very hard for me to differ that, because he's so over the top. I don't know how to see an image of Sion Sono. Is it like, does he mean it? Is it a joke? Does he play with our expectations of what is there? So that makes it very difficult for me to really say, okay, I understand it as this or that also in this film. As you say, they are, in this case, somehow free and formed characters, and they have their own voice in the film. But at the same time, the way he films them, it's closer to porn than anti-porn, I think.
Yeah, I think it's a matter of degrees, because I just, you know, I understand that a lot of people, especially those in the West, you know, they would argue that, oh, you know, this is like a sort of, it's a feminist, it's a kind of subversive feminist subtext or whatever. But, you know, as a woman, I just find most of his representation of women extremely offensive. Like you say, it's not just that kind of pornographic gaze. It's like either they just like the way he represents their masochism as well as the kind of sadism. It's really like, you know, that if they're not sadists, they're masochists, basically. And even the really strong women, they just turn out to be so nasty that even though they're fascinating, and he finds fantastic actresses to do those roles, like Ando Sakura in, like, you know, Love Exposure, and or Mariko Tsuzuki in Anti-Porno. They're such great actresses that they somehow manage to give them, like, give these characters more than what they're worth. But even then, I still find it in, you know, it just, his representation of women always gives me a very nasty aftertaste. Yeah. And with this film, even when you think about it, like the two most interesting characters are Kiriko, the girl who's really talented and who really wants to become an actress, but it's like to fulfill her dead husband's wish. And then the other girl, you know, that whole backstory of the father like sexually abusing her, and then it's unclear whether or not she killed him or he killed himself, which is like kind of, you sort of wonder why he suddenly killed him. It's just like those kind of backgrounds, like you say, it's a bit throwaway. But I think there's this, if there is a subtext, it's because with him, and at the end of the day, I don't think he ever could show women who can control themselves without feeling threatened by them, and sort of feeling like if they're people in control, then they're really nasty. I mean, but on a more emotional level, I was actually touched when I found out that Katako is actually the ghost. But then again, it's kind of not comfortable for me. But again, it's having said that, you know, this is common in a lot of Japanese representation of women. So, yeah.
I was actually wondering how you guys felt about Katako's character, about the ghost, because she's much more a dominant force in the creation of the fiction of the film that the filmmaker is. But then at the same time, I was thinking about what Patrick was saying about how to read an excessive image or an image that is so over the top, as in this case, you know, the Sono film. So I am the same as you, Maya. I can never, I don't know how to approach, like, I'm fascinated by this character, also by the operations that the fiction make through this character, but then I'm also repelled by that sexism. So I wanted to know how you guys feel about her in particular.
Yeah, I would answer a bit more on a basic level, maybe. In this case, I think it has to do what you just described or brought together has to do with he doesn't this is why I doubt the cinema so strongly. It's very vague. He doesn't really decide, and and then it depends on you. Like, and if I say now, this is like shit that I don't care about it, then I'm a snob. I cannot enjoy some fun. What, I don't know. And if it's the other way around, like, and I say, that's actually great. Like, I'm a naive sexist or whatever. It's very, and he plays with that, and it is done a lot, I think, in cinema. That there's no decision on an image, and that I find very, as I said in the beginning, that I find also tiring, because I see a lot of images that are very vague, and I can decide what to do with it, and the same is true for that. Yeah.
I think I'd like to actually mention his the Nikatsu film that he made, Anti-Porno. I don't know if you've seen that. I think it's because I think, Patrick, you mentioned a really interesting point, which is like that, you know, that whole the whole ambivalence about, you know, whether he's like pissing, you know, he's like playing with the audience, and then whether he's kind of deliberately sort of making those characters like binary in a way. And I think anti-porno is a good example, in the sense that in a way it's kind of part of my argument, in the sense that with women, he couldn't make real women who are like have different qualities. Like it's very extreme. It's like either or. And in that film, again, it's his just the whole sadomasochistic role play, where you have the girl who's the main star in the beginning, the younger girl, and she's like really mistreating her assistant. And then, you know, he flips it over and says, oh, it's actually a film production. And the assistant is actually the famous actress who actually abuses her off screen. And then she becomes this driveling, pathetic person, asking for it. And she's just this bundle of insecurity. But the thing is, it's like, again, that's it. For me, even though the film is actually very clever, and I thought it was just really well made on a technical level, from a very emotional, personal level, as a woman watching, I was just like really disgusted, to be honest. The way that, you know, like either of those women, whether they're playing a role on screen or whether they're in real life, you know, it's like they couldn't have any humanity. They're just horrible bullies. But of course, it also does draw attention to the fact that, you know, both the creative and filmmaking process, it does turn people into monsters, and it's all about, like, you know, control, but as well as insecurity. And he does capture that really well. So like, in a way, you end up feeling like, well, yeah, it's really clever, I have to say, and I'm very drawn to it watching it, but at the same time I'm really disgusted. Yeah. So I can see why you have that reaction too when you're watching like Escher, like Red Escher Street. But it's I guess it's more subdued, and he doesn't have the kind of caliber of actors who could carry it off. So in the end, it ends up coming off a little bit more wishy-washy as well.
Yeah, I agree. And I have seen anti-porno, and yeah, I understand. But it's the same with that film. I mean, you could say that he is criticizing. I mean, that is what we said already. It could also be all a big like criticism of what he actually shows. I don't know what all. It's always like that. That he's one of those filmmakers that makes exactly what he supposedly criticizes. Like that is to me always a riddle. I don't know. It happens a lot. I think that like we make a film about the power structures here and there, and then we make exactly the same, and basically. So I don't like. That's why I also criticized that it's so strongly a Shion Shono film when it's supposed to be about the extras. It's exactly the same method. I don't know if there's no why. I mean, I think he made this film Whispering Star, which was very different. But apart from that, I wonder, he seems like he could change his style. And not only in that, I mean, he started very differently, and now he's found like this, it's like his, how do you call it? His mark. I mean, that's his style. It's like, and he keeps it. That's what
I think at the end of the day, especially if you're a creator, at the end of the day, no matter how much you say you don't care and you just want to express yourself, at the end of the day, you really want to have an audience. And he's found the formula of doing extremely gory, violent films with a lot of sexploitation, because it really works. Works for the festivals, it works for the audience, mostly Western audiences, male. And of course, in filmmaking costs a lot of money. And in order to get investment, you know, he's got to make those kind of films that, you know, that sells, so otherwise he won't get the investment. And that's what it comes down to. And I guess probably if you ask him to go back to making those early films he makes, which actually were the ones that I really liked, it's impossible, because he's gone, you know, his ego's bigger. I mean, what he's used to in the level of production is so much bigger now. And even when he's saying that, oh, you know, I wanted to go back to more of an independent filmmaking stuff, when you look at this film, it's so bloated in terms of the scale, in terms of the even if it's not perfect, the complexity of what it requires in the shoot, and the huge cast he has, it's the kind of whole scope of it is not the same as the simpler films that he made when he was like still an independent filmmaker. So he's kind of, there's really no going back in a way. And I actually don't think he can change, in the sense that he's, on the one hand, he's done a lot of different genres and lots of different stories, worked with quite a lot of different people. But at the same time, I feel like every time I watch it, it's just those same familiar ways of approaching the subject that's very much like his own style. And for those who love him, that's probably what they're looking for. But for those who don't, I don't think he's going to change. I don't think he's capable of change.
But it shouldn't be then. I mean, then I find it very interesting, and I agree that, I mean, this film is still shown at a festival that is, and he is shown at festivals. We are discussing that film. I mean, we were chosen to discuss that film, and we still, I mean, in the end, I agree, this is mainly entertainment, and you can find it good or not. That is not the point. But I think there is, in the discourse around this film, and also the reason I think why it's shown here, is that there are some things in it, like with every film, there are things in it possibly, and one of those is the politics maybe behind it. There is some interesting stuff there. Also, that's what I wanted to say earlier. Also, when you mentioned it, there's some poetry apparently, which I never get, and I would disagree with the fact that, I mean, a poet would be very structured in my mind, because I mean, the image of a poet, like the person like walking in the woods, have no, I don't know, that is maybe an image without structure, but I think the work of a poet is full of structure and discipline, and and with him I don't see that. So I just wonder what, and this is a question I have maybe for both of you, I don't know, what makes this director so well received in this world? Because I don't get it. I understand that people like to watch it. That's not a question. I like that they enjoy it. I understand. I don't get it why this is supposed to be a film where there's a discourse around it, because to me it's not.
Well, for me, this is tied also to back again to the idea of excess, which is that at least me as a film watcher, I'm very, very much a Ninochka, very much against my will. But that scene where Ninochka, just arrives in Paris, and she's like, and she's all like serious, and she sees this hat, and this hat is ridiculous or very well designed, depending on which side of the spectrum you are at. And she's like, why? How can a civilization with such a hat progress or exist or something? And I am very much like that with excess. And usually my instinct goes against excess and against, over the top. And then with Sono, what fascinates me with Sono and with this film in particular is that it always conquers me in a way. There is something that absolutely breaks my Ninochka mentality to a point to which I end up being touched by the turn. I feel like this excess creates some sort of tenderness that touches me in a way, and it has to do with this is very abstract, but the belief in pure fiction, which is also which for me is the most political part of the film, or the strongest statement of this film has to do with creating as many microfictions as possible, and putting, it's a film about making as many films as possible inside one film also, and that excess of narration, of like just the willingness of just trying to create as many stories as possible in a world in which cinema is becoming much more minimal and much more serious and much more quiet. And even the color palette, we go to festivals and the color palettes are all very, kind of going towards gray, towards, but I always, I don't know, have this idea of a festival film and a color palette, that having this over the top, hyper fictionalized or meta fictionalized dispositive I don't know, it's just so tender to me that I start the film, as you were saying, I start the film being like, oh my God, this is so annoying, and I ended the film like moved to tears, you know?
That's a really nice way of, like, you know, it's nice for me to hear that that's a possible reaction too. I guess because most of the time, you know, the people I encounter who like his films, I think are a certain type of audience, and a festival audience in the West, who are really into a particular genre of Japanese cinema, which is those extreme action, extreme violence, extreme sexuality films that, you know, that Miike used to do in the earlier days, as well as, say, directors like Wakamatsu, even though I think Wakamatsu is a much more political and profound director than Shion would ever be. And or someone like more recent, like a Shiraishi, who also does very extreme violent films, but I think he also has his own voice, which is quite different. What I do, so in a way, I think that's why he's become really popular, because in some ways he's kind of in a way represented things that are almost embarrassing for a lot of more educated European audiences to admit that they enjoy. But because he's such an obvious auteur compared to some of the more sort of like B movie or like more like those Fantasia type festival films, that he's kind of straddles both art and those more genre films, then it's kind of, it makes him feel like it's okay to watch it. And also because he's sort of he kind of wears that subversiveness on his sleeves. And again, of course, you know, a lot of, on the other end, you know, there's the way that Japanese films are shot, it's so structured and it's so rigid, and people have to really, really prepare a lot for everything. And then the actors are like really do a lot of preparation, and then they follow, they're very method like. So in some ways it's liberating, both for the people watching them and for the people in the film production process, to have this kind of sort of excess, and this kind of almost like a I mean, he's almost like a child who, in both himself and the audience, it's almost like a child. If you're given like candies nonstop and you just keep eating it and eating and eating it, you know, and you don't care whether it makes you sick at the end. And it's that kind of experience, which is kind of not usual in Japanese cinema. But for me, I think what in the end still keeps me watching the films is the way he uses the actors, in the sense that if you see a lot of Japanese films and you see these actors and what they do in other films, then I think he does manage to make them do very different roles and does get very different performances out of them. I think they really just they cross the line a lot more. And he's managed to actually, especially with the less, like, you know, he's found some actors that he really saw something in them. And then since they've acted in his films, they've really moved on to doing like a lot more really great stuff. And then one thing I actually wanted to mention too is that I think when he really broke out in the West, especially in the film circuit, was with the Love Exposure. And I think one of the reasons was when people from like Europeans, especially those coming from Catholic backgrounds, when they see that, they're just so shocked, because it's about a family where there's a priest and he has a family, like he has a wife and he has children, and then they rebel against him, and then there's a lot of like stuff that's kind of blasphemous about religion. And I think for Europeans who are brought up maybe in a Christian country, though they themselves are not necessarily Christian, it comes as quite a shock. But actually, when he was making the film, you know, I kind of felt that he probably didn't really care, because in Japan, religion is like quite different from the kind of Judeo-Christian tradition. And for a lot of the Shinto and Buddhist priests, most of them are hereditary. So like if you're allowed to have children, and you actually pass on your temple to your son, and then they become monks, but they can still have children, and then they can, and it's acceptable. So for him, he may have done all of that without actually trying to be iconoclastic, that he was just doing it because he was ignorant. but somehow it had a really strong reaction on the Western Christian audience, like audience with the Christian culture. So that's kind of maybe how he kind of managed to break out.
So maybe I would then, if that's okay for you, I would like to discuss a bit what access is really, because I also struggle a bit here, because that is easy said. I mean, it's obvious there's a lot happening. I also used the word, I think, today already. So, but I would doubt myself now hearing that, because I mean, what he actually does, what is access? I mean, what I see is that he puts a lot of light through windows. So we always have this very soft, like light thing going on. And sometimes he uses colors in a very strange way, like with the light and also with real colors in the image. He has a lot of movement, character movement and camera movement. Mostly he lets them move in different directions. So it creates a sort of vertigo, almost like you are drawn into it. There is a lot of screaming, overacting in some way. So, but is that really an excess, or is that just, I don't know what it is, because I feel, for example, if you look, and I'm sorry to be so snobby and to put in like old films here, but if you look at, what do I know, the party, the mask ball in Dishonored by von Sternberg, or if you look at Fellini scenes of balls, of parties, they are so much more, the staging, the mise en scène is so much richer than in this. It's very simple, actually, what he does. He has a camera, a few actors, light, like these are the basics, and then he does the same thing over and over, and there's no surprise to me within a scene. There's no moment where I see, oh, there comes out somebody and I didn't expect that, or the scene moves around 180 degrees. It's always very clear what it is. It's just a, sorry to use the word, a dull excitement of seeing people, attractive people doing things, which is to me not really the aesthetics of ecstasy or whatever. Yeah.
I think, first of all, I think it's a very interesting comparison with Fellini, because he's one of my favorite directors. But I think it's too flattering to compare him, Sono, to Fellini, because I think what makes Fellini different, in my personal opinion at least, not just about the filmmaking brilliance and all of that, is that Fellini's films are always guided by moral vision. And that's actually what's lacking in Sono's films. And maybe the word excess is in, and what's interesting too is that, you know, his films are, I think people use the word excess because they're not on it, like, because it's, for example, if I think about a Japanese director like Wakamatsu, I think about anarchy, but anarchy is a political stance as well. But with Sono, he doesn't have a political stance. So I wouldn't even say that his films are anarchic, because to be anarchic, you have to be rebelling against establishment or whatever it is. And he's not really doing that. I think with him, it's more like he's a spoiled child, and he just wants to like have a go at things, or just like let things loose. And I don't see a lot beyond that. And I wouldn't even want to try and look for meaning in any of his films, apart from like those very basic ones, like you say, that it's almost quite trite. But for some reason, he's managed to stage them in the way that he's managed to create the atmosphere. And pacing towards the end, it's like, you know, when he's saying something quite simple, as a cinematic experience, it's quite exciting, like the way Lucía said. But in terms of you saying that, you know, the way he choreographs the scenes and all of that, you're not very impressed by it. And I think I take your point, you know, and I can't think of anything to disagree with that personally, actually.
Yeah, I must admit, I read a review of a friend of mine on Guilty of Romance to prepare for that. And I read the following. I just want to read to you, just to make my point also here. He uses excessive touches, baroque abandon, and insane emotional overdrive. And to me, that is always, I mean, it's a bit of a I don't get this from the films. Maybe that's also me. I have there's a limit I can take, and then I stop. And that's reached here, and I don't want to feel like a bourgeois, boring kind of person for it, because I think I can enjoy a lot of things, but this is not one of them.
Would you guys like to think about also Dracula sex tape in the context of excess? Because I mean, this is the reason. Just I would like to know your thoughts on it, because they resonate very much, no?
I really like the film, but I'd like to hear what Patrick has to say about it first, and Lucía as well.
Yeah, I let's put it like that. I was the thing that struck me most, that is also most interesting to me, that film in relation also to the other film, but also on itself, is the absence of a place, of a real space. It seems to be and that is something I find strange. I don't like it at first, but then I also find it interesting. Why is the film set in this snowy landscape on border of a river, and the director comes from nowhere, he goes to nowhere? It's, to me, in my opinion, it's the best moment and the most funny in the film when the director arrives. With the director, and you know already that something strange is going to happen with this person, and that I like. I find it always difficult if a film deals a lot with discourse more than with real life. I feel very strong in that film. I mean, it's like there are different layers of political correctness, of respect of things, and how we, yeah. And I sometimes, or I mean, in 5 minutes, also very difficult to do. So I understand the issue. I just find he doesn't quite come to the point where this is like an abstraction that leads us to a true life situation. It's just, it stays the abstraction, it stays the discourse, the theory about things, which can also be enjoyed, of course. Yeah, that's my first words.
Lucía?
I think now that you're talking about space, one of the things that is most fascinating to me about Dracula sex tape is that idea of, you know, as you were saying, this space is kind of like, it's ice, but it's also kind of a void. So as you were saying, I also have this, I'm very interested in how like the film is so openly discursive, and it's also very openly about like very contemporary today's discourse. But I think it's a film about staging discourse in the void. So I think that's what I guess kept me the most, and I think that it's a lot related to Esther Street, because there is also this idea of discourse and space, in which you have this never-ending street. Or for me, one of the most interesting things about Red Post on Esther Street is the idea of the Red Post on Esther Street, right? It's like this never-ending street that kind of has the shape of Sunset Boulevard, you know, because when you see Sunset Boulevard in a map, it's just like a never-ending snake that just crosses a whole city. It looks like a fictional street even, but it's a real street, Sunset Boulevard. So it's like staging discourse in this almost imaginary space, you know, the ice and the Esther Street that seems to never end.
Actually, when I first watched the film, I didn't realize it was Canadian. I thought it was French, but I kind of felt it was weird for a French film. And being a Canadian myself, you know, I kind of, once I realized it was Canadian and Quebecois, just everything made sense for me, like shooting in the snow, because it was obvious to do that. And I just want to mention that actually, I'm not clear on the exact details of this law, but actually in Canada, the Canadian Film Board recently passed this new law or rule, I think a couple of months ago, that all audiovisual productions, I think sponsored by the government, has to have over 50% diversity representation. So I think it's actually quite relevant what he's doing with that film. that either he's making fun of that or he's kind of in a way celebrating, I think doing both. And also, the fact that, I think it's probably more Canadian than French in the sense that kind of slight wokeness that that we are much more diversity conscious. And so in the way he's kind of both drawing attention to that and making fun. But at the same time, what I liked is, and also the fact that, that the whole joke about the smoking, I think it was just my personal interpretation, but I think he's also making fun of like French style or term filmmaking where, the smoking thing is such a big deal. Because again, in Canada, smoking is not as glorified as it is in French culture and intellectual circles. But I also really, really liked the choice of the cast, especially the actress who was asked to be casted as in the Dracula film. I think she really has, like, especially towards the end, and the way she was like, she just really had a style, and she was like really cool, and I really liked the final scene when in some way you feel like she has the last word, the way she found her own cigarette and then she smoked it. I just thought it was kind of cool, and I felt like I didn't have to read too much into the film, that it was just like a kind of clever, a clever joke about the way these people make artsy films. And also the fact that, like when if you were to make a kind of Dracula film, you're going to need like a lot of money and a lot of casting and blah, 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 maybe shoot in Europe and all that stuff. And he only had 5 minutes and he had no budget. So he kind of made the best of that in that way, which I thought was really clever.
2 questions. Did you laugh during the film? And the second question, why do you think the actor who acted as the director spoke like he spoke?
I did laugh. I saw this film many times also because of the programming committee. So I guess I laughed the first 2 or 3 times. I think it's a question of style, which is very much linked to the question of excess, right? Because I was thinking about, you were asking before, what is really excess? And I think in this excess in these 2 particular cases has to do with situating the films far from one frontier or one limit. So excess would be too much of something where you can ask, well, but what is too little or something, or where is the line? So this is all made up, right? This is an idea of excess that has its own norm weaved into it. So it's both an idea of what is too much and what is the normal. And I think in Dracula Sex Tape, that's where the style comes from, right? It's the style of being so extra. Is this speaking too fast, saying too many things at the same time, weaving too many ideas together, caring too much about things that you are not supposed to care so much as, like, giving a cigarette. For me, the cigarette thing was so clever also because it made me think of this. This is so random, but have you read Little Women? I'm sure you have read Little Women, or at least. And there's this thing in Little Women about the lines. I don't know if you remember, but girls in school collect these lines. I read it in Spanish, so I don't know if lines is a thing. But there are these very precious objects that cost money. So it's Little Women is all about class. So there's this idea of like financial autonomy that has to do with the lines. So it made me think about that, or you were saying, Maggie, how precarious, like how little budgets, what is financial autonomy when you have no budget? So I guess in this film, that's also weaved into it. Like, how can I be so extra, or how can I be excessive with absolutely no money, which is the same with the Sono film. It's not absolutely no money, but I think the Sono film has to do with, like, I think it's subversion. I mean, subversion is a very big word, and his excess, it's in the excessiveness of thinking, everyone is going to speak too loud, everyone is going to scream a lot, if there's going to be a million characters, there's going to be a million stories. So everything is, I guess his idea is that, no? Excessive is what it's more than the norm.
It's exactly what I said. In my opinion, I understand that this is supposed to be subversive as compared to what we see at festivals normally, for example, or what we see in cinema most of the time. But is it really subversive compared to our daily life? What you just described, everybody is talking too loud, everybody is, to me, that is an experience I have anyway. So to me, that doesn't feel like, I mean, I'm confused because at the same, I feel that it's not a subversive in terms of, it could almost be like an observation of life, just exaggerated to make like a regular satire or something. Like we show you how the people talk. And the thing is that the feeling at the end to me is not, I don't change my perception of that because I have the same emptiness as from the screaming I get every day. There is, to me, there's no difference. It's, for example, when they, I mean, cinema has always been, I think, supposed to be like can teach us how to deal with the world. There's like a big idea from earlier times, like we get a glimpse at modern life, this and that, fragmentation, this and that. And I think this is part of both of these films. I'm not sure, but I think the directors are not necessarily saying, oh, I will do something that is completely against the norm of life. I will show you now how life works. To me, that is, it's more like they try to, I don't know what it is. That reminds me of now being, I once heard a critic say that he doesn't think Hong Sang-soo is part of his life. It's that he doesn't think Hong Sang-soo makes films about life, but Paul Verhoeven. And I always thought that was a very strange comment, and now I made it myself. But I still did it. So I think these films are not subversive in relation to my daily life. That's what I want to say.
So you think this is realism?
I think it is not realism in terms of how they act, but realism in terms of how it feels, if that makes any sense.
I don't think it's realistic, but I do think it's pragmatic in the sense that, you know, when you have non-professional or not the very best actors and a very low budget, which means that you can't do a lot of retakes, it's just easier to get them to overact than for them to be nuanced and underact, because they can't really get it right. And also it's kind of hard to control the acting because it's, I've been told, for example, a long time ago, I had an interview with the Holzapfel, and he said, you know, when he makes films, he has to do a lot of master shots because he says, compared, I mean, he's obviously also worked with like some actors like, you know, I think it was, what's her name? Juliette Binoche, and he was saying that, you know, with some of the Hollywood actors or some European actors, you know, their training is quite a lot more thorough and rigorous than a lot of the actors that he'd had to work with in Taiwan. I'm not saying that one is better than the other, but the way that these people can just switch on to a scene, that they're much more trained to do close-ups for like long takes, it makes it, you know, whereas for him, when he's working with his cast, and of course he also uses some people who are not like professional, so he's found that, you know, he couldn't, there's certain shots he can't take because they couldn't really fulfill what he wanted, and so he had to take more master shots and stuff like that. And so a lot of the time with the filming, it's contingency, you know, and with that crew for like Vampire Sex Tapes too, I don't know whether these were like just the director's friends or how professional they were. And so again, it's like, you know, it's difficult for them. It's usually when you get people who are less experienced, they end up overacting rather than underacting. Yeah. And another thing that I kind of wondered if you guys noticed was that, you know, while the film was a sort of a bit of a joke about diversity casting, they actually had diversity casting in the film as well. I think the director is like half Asian or half something and then half Caucasian. And then I didn't see the face very well of the other girl, but she looks Asian, but I could be wrong. I wonder if you guys noticed, or if you guys even noticed that the way they put those characters together was a kind of diversity casting.
Yeah. I mean, it seemed very meta to me, the whole, I mean, yeah, understood. And yeah.
weren't to know that in the beginning, right? Because we weren't to know that, because we were, in a way, it's sort of deliberately like distracted us into thinking that because of the title that we think this is about vampire, about sex. So I just wonder what you think about that. Does that disappoint you, or does that come as a kind of pleasant surprise?
I don't know. It was, of course, I wanted to say that I watched the film 2 times. I watched it yesterday again, also because of a lot of things that you are not sure if you saw them right, because there's a lot of dialogue. There is the title that is there. There is the smoking. So it's like in German we say Setzkasten, that doesn't help you anything. So it's like like a box where you have different places to put things. I'm sorry for my bad English. And and you have to see it again to see the whole image, I think. That helped me, at least. So the title was not, I wasn't disappointed. I didn't know. I mean, I saw one of his films he made before, so I kind of had an expectation, and that was fulfilled.
Yeah, totally. I mean, I saw another of his films also, so the way of speaking seemed like part of a style, no, not part of our acting, but a style. But for me, the experience of the diversity cast is, I mean, it's for me, it's what makes the end joke work, right? It's all a construction towards it. So it's like you were saying, this is a very clever joke. This is short, that it's based on a very clever joke, which is that at the end she's going to be, all this fuss is going to be about diversity casting. You're just going to be a corpse sitting there, just to be a diversity corpse. A diversity corpse is a very like strong concept, no?
I think there should be more films that are like little jokes, just a joke, and then we can go home. I think that's nice.
But I think it is being saved by the main actress, that she really does have a great screen presence, which actually makes a joke work, because she's actually a really good actress, and she really, I mean, I was very captured by her. So, but I would actually wanted to ask both of you is what you thought about that whole way he played with the smoking, and what you think it means.
Yeah, it's. I mean, since I spent most of my life in Vienna, I must say that in Vienna there is a very, smoking is kind of, it's two things at the same time. It is, on one side, it's the connection is very positive. So smoking is something good. You go to the cafes, it's like a culture. It's like an atmosphere thing. On the other hand, it's a very right-wing thing. So they very late stopped, they stopped their, what's the word? They forbid people to smoke in public places very late compared to other countries in Europe. And it was the right-wing party that fought for it mostly. So some people were very confused what to do and what not, and I don't know. What do I say? It's completely wrong what I said. It's the other way around. The right-wing party wanted to have people smoke, of course. So some people didn't know if they would now sympathize with the right-wing party because they would at least allow the smoking. So in my experience in a film, smoking is something I like. Because it is part of a style of cinema, and I like it. And there's nothing that there's no reason to not smoke in a film. And I see that there are rules opposed on big productions or whatever. To me, it's ridiculous, because either a film just documents life and people are smoking, so that's okay, or it just looks good, and anything that looks good there can be an argument for it. Or you just describe a character in a fictional film that smoking can tell a lot. And as you said, it helps the acting. No, I mean, it's just much some people act better with a cigarette than without a cigarette.
Totally, and you made me think about how aren't they like now erasing cigarettes from some films on Netflix or something? I remember I read something about it, but I think in this film it's so interesting that denying someone a cigarette is such an act of cruelty, and in this film it's such a hilarious act of cruelty that she's like, "Give me a cigarette," no, and then the insistence on that thing, so it just becomes this very small gesture that is completely moved from its referential point, which is like when someone tells you, "Give me a cigarette," you give them a cigarette. There is absolutely no question there. So it becomes this quirky idea of character and of relationship and of that relationship about, no, you're going to be a dead corpse in my film. I think it builds up to that.
Are you saying it's like about power relationship?
In a very light, but I mean, what I like about this film is like everything is very heavy and it's also very light. So I think it's about a power relationship, but it's also a joke, and it's very, it just goes. It's very masterful how it works like that. That it would make something so heavy such a chill joke,
But I think I would actually like to maybe come back to what Patrick was talking about, excess. Because like somehow I feel like we're going somewhere with that argument, but at the same time we haven't really got to the point about it yet. I mean, I don't know where to set the parameter, but I think what's interesting though is that maybe you brought up a very, very good point that just using the word excess to describe Sonor Chion's films is maybe not adequate, and because in a way I think to have excess, you've got to have the opposite of excess to set it against, how you define it. And I'm just kind of interested to hear a little bit more about what both of you would think about, first of all, how you define excess in cinema, what it means, and what examples you would use as excess. Because excess doesn't necessarily just mean like people shouting a lot, like you say, or having a very colorful mise en scène. I mean, you could have a black and white film and just have 3 lines of dialogue and maybe just like, two shots, but it could still be excessive. Like, for example, in my opinion, like the film Long Day's Journey to the Night is very excessive, but not necessarily in a good way.
I think Lucía said something very true, that films maybe set their own parameter in what can be then considered excessive. I liked it. My experience, for example, when you mentioned Ho Xiaoxian, I wanted to polemically announce that I think Ho Xiaoxian's films are excessive to me, because I get floated with the world when I look at his films. There is the sound of cicadas or trees that can feel like that can be very rich to me. I remember, for example, a retrospective at the Austrian Film Museum on Indian cinema, and that was a retrospective that was from Western filmmakers making films about India, like from Marguerite Duras over, I don't know, like Images of India, or Robert Gardner, like to name 2 famous examples. And to see these images from a foreign place in such a close relation to each other, to get this experience, I think there is what I want to say is that there is, in a ideal scenario, if you are really into it, if you see something that transports you, there is excess, can be in any film. It is maybe integral to a cinema experience. Now that we are talking in front of a laptop, maybe that can be said. No, I have not, maybe I would have felt very different about the excess in this specific Shion Shono if I watched it in a cinema. So yeah, I know we are all tired of talking about that, but I just wanted to say it. Yeah,
I think I agree with that. I think at the end of the day, it's also about whether because it's pointless to compare between different directors, in the sense that, if you compare Sonor's films with really minimalist director, it's kind of like, you know, it's apples and oranges, but perhaps it's worthwhile to then, with any director, not necessarily just Sono, that to maybe also compare him to his other films. It's like, you know, for example, for me, this film is not especially excessive compared to some of his other works or some of his TV, like, you know, Tokyo Vampire Hotel or something, or Forest of Love. So if anything, you know, it's actually more dialed down, partly because of the budget, I guess. So, you know, but I'd be interested to hear more about what you think about, you know, like Hou Xiaoxian, for example, you know, apart from like the richness of it, you know, are you saying, when you say you think his film's excessive, do you mean that in a positive way? And can excess be positive?
Yes, absolutely. In this case, I would mean absolutely positive. I would say there is a sense of touching, to touch the world, of embracing it, of feeling it. That is to me part of excessiveness, though that is broad, and it's, no, I'm not a philosopher, so I'm moving in a very, I'm not sure of the field I'm in, but just my personal experience is all I can give. And I think that excessiveness has also maybe to do with an obsessiveness in some way. That has to do with work, the work of showing something. Because if I imagine somebody showing me a body and really trying to give me the feeling of that body, the can smell it, and that I can, as I said, as I can touch it, then this can be an excessive image, even if it's just even if it's just a shot of a body. I think, for example, to name another more minimalistic filmmaker that worked excessively, I think, on these things is Chantal Akerman. The way she films bodies or filmed bodies is excessive. Yeah.
I think it's also something about, like, certain films are memorable and other films are more because they're so sensory. It's like you have to live in the moment. So I remember that certain films, like Sono's film, for example, you know, when you're watching it in the cinema, it's a very intense experience, but these films are extremely forgettable, because, like, if you know, I have trouble remembering them or what happened in the films, and they all just blur into each other. Whereas there are other films that, you know, scenes are like really deeply memorable, even if nothing happens. Or like the whole experience that, you know, maybe when I was watching it, you know, I may have a delayed reaction, like for example, Haneke's films, for example, you know, when I'm watching them, it's like I'm grappling with what's going on, and just having to really pay quite a lot of attention. And I don't really and I can't really actually even start thinking about the film until afterwards. But once I do, I can't stop thinking about it. And I keep going over scenes and going over things and having lots of reactions. And I think with Hou Xiaoxian, I mean, in a way, he's got the best of both worlds, in the sense that when you're watching it, they're quite intense cinematic experiences, like you say. Like, for example, you know, like Café Lumière, you know, just the way he captures the sounds. And I remember that he, you know, I don't know if this is relevant, but I think Den said it's open, so I just wanted to bring it up because I think it's interesting now that you brought him up. Is that I remember that he was telling me about how he was shooting Café Lumière, and because he had to shoot in Japan, he doesn't speak Japanese and he doesn't live in Japan, so it's all quite foreign to him. And he actually said when he arrived, he was really a bit stressed up because he actually hadn't figured out what he was going to do, what the film's going to be about. But what he started to do was that every day he was going into town to have these film meetings from where the place he was staying temporarily. So he started to notice how, you know, because in Japan you have to change trains a lot, and then which train lines you take in a way determines your life. It really shapes your life. And so he started to say, oh, what about we plan the story around particular train changes and what kind of people would take these trains to these areas and where would they change trains and how would it affect their lives and that sort of thing. So he started with that, and then he had the idea of listening to the sounds and then having the character being a sound recordist, because for him these sounds were very foreign to him, especially a lot of these Japanese train announcements, which just keeps going on and on and on. And because he was in a foreign country and he couldn't understand the words, he was in some ways more sensitive to all the different sounds at the train stations. And so that's how he mapped the story, by planning where the female character lived, where she would change the trains, which cafe she was going to go to, and how she was going to meet up with that guy who's the sound recordist, Asano, played by Asano, and how it all organically grew. And so it's kind of like, I just find that filmmaking process really interesting and really immersive. But at the same time, when you're watching the film itself, it actually feels structured.
Isn't it like that? I mean, I don't know how you feel about that, but I feel if I go out in nature, for example, there's excess all the time because it's too much, especially now when it turns into spring, for example. I don't know how it is in Canada, if it lasts longer until spring or not. In my cliche head, it lasts a bit longer. But
yes, it does.
Okay. So, yeah, and then I feel that when somebody like changes it in a film, like I mean, with Hou Xiaoxian, I have the feeling he manages to capture that sense. And and I'm not sure if a speedy dialogue or an overacting does the same. Then the ability. Last year there was this fantastic film from China, Li Dongmai, which is called Mama in international title. It was in Venice. It was a debut film, and it was a bit in the vein of Hou Xiaoxian, we can say, but it is just the feeling of time and space being there. And I think that relates also that those two films, and now we are more talking about Shion Shono again, the space is missing. Also in Shion Shono's film, it's a play, The Escher Street, with MC Escher kind of making these streets also, or these promise. But how can something that is so constructed be too much?
You made me think of, when you were talking about this, you made me think of this Lucrecia Martel. I think she has done this conference a lot, but she made this thing where she's like, how do I make people pay attention, you know? And I think it's like a little like Tupperware or something, and she tells the person who is handling the lights in the conference room, turn off the lights, and then she puts her cell phone in the thing, and there's this only like very blue, like small source of light, and she's like, so now you are all leaning towards me, because the audience is like leaning towards her because she's the only source of light, and everyone's paying this extreme attention. And I was thinking about excess of stimuli and speed of thought, because to me they seem to be in a way connected to what you were saying, Maggie, that the Shion Sono film is like, or Shion Sono's films in general, to me, are films in which the excess of stimuli or the quantity of stimuli that is so high makes me think during the film like a crazy person. I'm thinking all the time, you know, having all these ideas. This is, you know, ideas about cinema, ideas about space, ideas about structure, ideas about actors and what is, and all the ideas happen within when I'm watching the film, in the duration of the film, which seems impossible, but at the same time, I think that's how it's also making it work. Whereas with films in which stimuli are strong but slower, I do all the thinking after the film. I don't know if this is a thing for you. Like excess makes me react faster, and then the contrary of excess, what would it be? What do you call this? Asceticism, I don't know. It makes me think slower. You know, it just controls your body rhythm.
It's like you know, when we're talking about excess and not excess, it's like what, you know, sometimes I'm wondering if they're just kind of in some ways projecting an image that they feel that the audience wants to see. And of course, like a lot of these films that are very popular in the, you know, in festivals, you know, they always bomb in China, or if they start to do well with the local audiences because it's won a huge award, or they market it in a certain way. Like, for example, with the film Long Day's Journey into the Night, when they were showing it in China, they marketed it, not only that it was in Cannes, they marketed it as this Valentine's Day film where, you know, or I think it was a New Year film or something. It said that it turned into an event where you go in to see the end of the world because it's like the last day of the year, and that you just want to kiss at this moment that the main characters kiss. So they turn it into a kind of like event for people because, you know, just to give them something to go to. And apparently the box office just plunged as soon as people have actually started to watch the film, you know, after 2 days. And then with the Japanese films, it's almost like, again, it is interesting because I think a lot of Westerners have this image of Japanese people being very, very restrained and elegant and repressed, and they don't talk much, and that everything's very minimalistic and very zen. And so in the end, it sort of ends up dictating their taste in the sense that they either go for those kind of very minimalist, very elegant films like the Ozu, Mizoguchi style, or they kind of want to see this excess because at the other end of Japanese pop culture is all this like otaku stuff. But in reality, in Japan, I mean, like I think most of the more indie films, or most of the films that people like, they do tend to be the quieter films. But at the same time, a lot of commercial films also feature, especially, you know, people who act a lot on TV, they do feature a lot of overacting, a lot of very, you know, exaggerated, melodramatic everything. And in some ways, I think Sonashion's films are an extension of that, except he kind of stylizes it. You know, I don't know if I'm sort of getting where I'm, you know, saying what I want to say, but, you know, I'd love to hear what your responses are.
Well, someone in the, oh, sorry, Patrick, you wanted to?
Yeah, just short reaction is, or a question, is it that you feel that the perception of Western audiences of Asian films, or what is Asian films? That is the next question. But for example, of Japanese films, I mean, is there the projection that is on it, things like excess, do they have to do with that? I mean, do we feel something is exaggerated when a Japanese audience wouldn't, for example, or is that something that is basically the same? I mean, I don't know if you can say, but it just went to my head when you talk now. I mean, is these different perceptions of things and the expectations Western audiences have, is it really exaggerated, or because you mentioned that there's a lot of overacting in Japanese television, so is it, I mean, I don't know, does he benefit from, does Shion Shono benefit from the fact that he does it a bit more stylish, and actually he does something that a lot of directors do?
I think maybe it's to do with the guilty pleasure in a way, because for example, I just give an example. I'm so sorry that the film title escaped me, but it's a film that was also very popular in European and North American film circles. It's about, I think the director's called Uchida Eiji. And it's about this like hopelessly unsuccessful filmmaker. And he tries to make a film and cast women in it, making sort of sexploitation films, but really his real excuse is so that he can have sex with them. And of course, there's also been quite a lot of films, at least in Asia, like a film by a Hong Kong director called Pang Hong-chung called Avian, a lot of films about how directors pretend to have a film project and really they just want to like shag the that the people want to become actors. And in this film, like, it gets more and more violent, and you know, there's a lot of like rape and violence and beating up women and stuff. And for me, it's just absolutely intolerable watching that film. But at the same time, it's like that same impulse where you feel like certain directors make these films because they found a formula and it works. Because I think it's guilty pleasure for a lot of like polite Europeans who would never, ever dream of doing that in real life, or even dream of wanting to see a film like that that's made by a European. But it's kind of because of that exotica of being happening in a faraway country, and just watching them, that it's kind of, and they can say, well, this is all like a pastiche, or that it's kind of like subversion. Then it becomes like a kind of guilty pleasure. And maybe I'm being harsh, but I do suspect that there's a certain instinct involved.
Well, I mean, there's nothing wrong with that. I mean, that can be a cinema. I mean, in my opinion, I mean, I don't have to like it, and I don't see a lot of those films, to be honest, but I understand or respect or tolerate whatever if people like these guilty pleasures. I mean, if cinema is a guilty pleasure, that's okay for me.
Yeah, but then how far do you go? Because for me, some of these films have gone too far. It's just like insulting to women, and it just makes me very it makes me very not uncomfortable as much as more like I got to a point where I'm angry to see this kind of representation on screen. And this is what kind of in a way annoys me about Sonos films, especially the later ones. Yeah, that I guess, you know, the word is gratuitous, but then of course that's a word that it's qualifiable. But yeah, but anyway, I wonder if we should also take in some questions.
I've been weaving them into our conversation because I have access to the chat, but actually someone in the audience was saying something, the Telegram group was saying something that refers to this in a way, that she was saying that she found the film a mix of Kurosawa, Takashi Miike, and Sailor Moon, you know, the cartoon. And I was thinking about Sailor Moon actually, because I was thinking about the film's emotional excess, and where else do I find, what is the root of this emotional excess? And I was thinking about that, about those cartoons, and how even if I also feel I feel the same way about that, you know, the sexism in these films makes it's unbearable, but also makes them so much worse than they could be. Also, you know, they could be much more interesting. But then one thing that at least makes it more bearable and more interesting to me has to do with that the Sono film has a very big emotional excess as a positive thing to me. You know, this is something that I find fascinating in both films, that everyone is very much outspoken about what they want and who they are and how they relate to each other, and the conversations are very frank, you know, and everyone is screaming, you know, let's take this shooting, and there is something very liberating in this emotional excess that for me brings me to my when I was a child and I was watching Sailor Moon, you know, and the emotions were the emotions were all over the place.
It's interesting. In German television, there was always this Japanese animation series with football players, which I watched. They they scored incredible goals, or somebody would hit him in the stomach and then he would fly across the pitch and to the goal and whatnot. And these, yeah, I understand that this can be related, and maybe it has to do with the I have the feeling sometimes that there are images or ideas in images that are brought to us with a hammer. Like somebody would throw them into us, and that creates this, I think, like now they want to show us somebody can hit the ball really hard. So they show it from 10 different angles, things flying. I mean, this is animation, but I think indeed that there is something in Shion Shono that also likes to do that, like to show how he shows that these girls, let's say girls, women, but he presents them as girls. I find it difficult to admire the director. This club that loves the director, that has the poster of him. He shows us in 100 different ways how much they love him. There's no change in that, actually. He shows it to us in all kinds of ways. Of course, you can always say there is a change because you see different people doing different things, but I think the idea is always they love him so much. They sing a song, they pray, I don't know what they do. And this creates something that is related to what we just discussed, I think also, yeah.
I think, not like I'm saying this in his defense, but I think it is the whole image of like schoolgirls in uniforms in the sort of cultist behavior. I think that's like a kind of feature of his, a kind of auteurish feature that he has in a lot of his films, like, you know, Suicide Club or like Love Exposure or Forest of Love, or so many of his is everything, in fact. So for me, it's more like just a little bit more of an, or like a tick, like just a kind of habit that he loves to have, you know, just showing this kind of crazed fan behavior. I mean, of course, it's you know, like you say, it's directed towards a director who's in a way an alter ego, but at the same time, I think he, in some ways, he kind of enjoys parodying this kind of herd-like behavior and this kind of hysteria that I think he somehow also associates with school girls, that he finds that kind of sexy, showing these kind of schoolgirls in uniforms acting in a really screamy way, because actually that's also a very common image in a lot of Japanese youth cinema, as well as in films by other directors, that in some ways it's almost a signpost.
Sorry, I have to be the moderator now and say we went a little over the time limit. So I would like to know if anyone has, if we can do some closing remarks, or or close the last conversation. Because I also think it makes me think a lot about parody. And it also puts me in an uncomfortable place. I don't know, this is going to sound terribly inappropriate, but I also watch the TV show about the football players, but in Argentina, at least, we grow up also watching all these Japanese cartoons, like, and other Asian cartoons, and like Sailor Moon, and that also has so much to do with my early, or like children's sex education in a way, and how desire is shaped, and it had a lot to do with my sexual awakening in a way, you know. That's very disturbing, but it's part of us as a generation. It's a cultural history that he's spinning into, you know.
But unfortunately, I think, I mean, I've also grown up really loving Japanese anime and manga. But at the same time, I think it's that all this, even from very young age, it's kind of culture. It's like it totally condones men being horny. I mean, like you say, I guess, you know, they're also much more open about expressing sexual desire in, you know, even for like, you know, stuff that's being watched for very young children. And in some ways the openness is good, but at the same time, it's quite one-sided. It's often about making jokes about horny boys and men who want, you know, and that's, and in a way, I guess that's also what made Love Exposure so popular when it first came out for foreign audiences, the way that guy was doing all that upskirt photography and just taking pictures of girls' underwear, and that whole thing about, you know, buying underwear from a vending machine in Japan, that sort of stuff. You know, those are kind of things that really kind of, because they're so out of this world. But at the same time, you know, I know how you feel, but at the same time, I think it's also quite disturbing. The way the way that it's the sexual openness that's being represented is not. It's very much skewed towards the male experience.
Yeah, totally. That's why I find it disturbing, because I find this echo in my own, growing up a girl. I mean, being socialized as a girl from a very young age and still being exposed to these cartoons. It is very disturbing to think, how the first images of sex that I was exposed to were these very one-sided things. But also as a child, I remember being a little horny about it also,
I do understand that, but it's also like, I don't know if you've watched the really popular series called Dragon, I think it's Demon Slayer in English, this series, and then the film version of the anime has broken all records in Japan. So I watched the Demon Slayer, the TV series on Netflix, and I was like, I have to think I really, really enjoyed it. I was totally binging it. But at the same time, it made me really uncomfortable because like one of the stories about this boy who's like, his family was like eaten by demons who are kind of like zombies, but his sister managed to survive, but she's become a zombie. And in order to keep her from eating other people, they put this gag on her. And then later on, she develops kind of superpowers, and she often saves him from attacks by other demons. So it kind of felt very conflicted, because on the one hand, I was really happy that at least they show a female character who was really kick-ass, and she was really like a lovely person. But at the same time, it's like, I kind of felt like, well, why do you have to have this main character who's like the best fighter in the film being gagged the entire time and not being able to speak? And then it makes me remember the recent scandal in Japan about the Olympics, the former Olympics chairman who had to like resign because he said that you shouldn't have too many women in the meetings, that they talk too much, and then that kind of really hit home for me.
I have one last question then for you guys. Do you think there could be a female Sion Sono? Or there will ever be? Or if there should be even?
What would it look like? I just try to imagine, having like I imagine scenes with a lot of, muscles of men in a room throwing water at each other, and I don't know. It's yeah, of course. Maybe there is already in some. I can imagine. I don't know, some underground thing, but not in the mainstream. So I think it would be nice only for the fact that then one can do a double feature, which I would love to see. Just have these two extremes clash. But in the end, I don't know. As I hoped I said in this conversation, I don't think Shion Shono makes cinema any richer. So I don't think a female version is needed.
I want to mention the female Japanese director who's not a female Sono Shion, but just like as a comparison, her name is Yokoyama Satoko, and she's like one of my favorite female directors in Japan. And she's one of the films she's made, which showed at the Japan Society Festival, which is also again one of my favorite films. It's called An Actor, and the film is actually about this actor who's always trying to make it, but he just hasn't. And then he has these auditions, and he also has these roles not as main person. And then in between, she weaves in these fantasy sequences, and it's really all about the love of cinema as well as the love, the passion of an actor. And I really recommend this film if you haven't seen it, because it's just so much more deeply emotive. It's just the way she plays with fantasy and the whole medium of film itself. It's just so poetic and very, very humane. But she also has a kind of so-called excess, and since another film she made, which I also really love, is it was all in the dialect of where she comes from, in Aoyama, and I think it's called Miraculous Love Story. And again, there's a lot of crazy dialogue in the dialect, and the film is like really wild with a lot of energy. But in a way, I kind of like it more because it has a different vibe that's also very much distinct of the director, and you don't feel like this is like repetitive or that it's about just like about me kind of thing. But that's all I have to say.
Well, thank you very much, guys. I don't know about you, but this has been a very amazing, fun evening to me.
Same for me. And thanks a lot, Patrick, in particular, for your interesting definitions of words and the way you look into like different, like, things that's beyond just like a film. Thanks.
Thank you. I enjoyed a lot, both of you and the.
I think we did as well as the audience. We really had been here very intrigued watching your debate. And I thank you very much as well for your deep insights and sharing our thoughts. And yeah, so we wait for the female Sion Sono, I would say. And we will get back to you then for the next session.
Yeah.
So I thank you as well, the audience who are watching us, and I would like to draw your attention to the next days. There are a few debates still coming. Tomorrow, another of our this year's format of asking film festivals to create a small program. So tomorrow there will be the Contextual Festival, a guest here in Berlin in our cinema, and Mumbai Film Festival. And they will talk with Kirsten Johnson, and it will be Stoffel de Béziers, and I'm sorry, just get Greg de Cuier is here, and Kalpana Nair, yeah, and they will discuss the films we will present. And of course, you're at the Telegram channel here to share your thoughts, and as well the debates from last days and the conference you find as well on the YouTube channel soon. So stay with us until Sunday, and have a nice evening.